Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the North Hollywood to Pasadena Bus Rapid Transit BRT project. My name is Tito Crona, your Community Relations Manager for the project, and today we are providing an update on the project with specific focus on the Burbank segment. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago to talk about the segment in Eagle Rock, and that will focus was specifically on what's going on in Colorado, and today we're going to be talking about pretty much the Burbank segment and provide you inputs and updates on what's going on. Before we get started, let's talk about some housekeeping items. We are recording this meeting today. This meeting will be uploaded to the project webpage for you to view at a later time, most likely by Monday. Your videos and your mics are on mute. If you have any questions after our presentation, you can submit them using the Q&A function. We'll be taking written questions and comments, and we'll be responding to these after the presentation. Though you can also submit comments. Again, we will take your comments, but we won't be reading those because we want to be here to answer your questions for the updates that we're providing. I don't see anybody that's checked in via phone yet, but I will provide a phone number later on, which is for the those folks that are joining by telephone only, and they can provide their comments or questions via text at 818-650-0619. Again, 818-650-0619. Those comments or questions will be taken via text for those who are joining via phone. Before we go on about the Spanish, I did want to see if there were any elected officials or elected official representatives. If you are in the audience, please raise your hand as we generate your information. I do want to acknowledge that I see Dave Perry from the Office of Supervisor, Catherine Barker. Thank you for joining us, Dave. I don't think we have any other electeds right now, but I will ask again throughout the presentation to see if there are any additional elected official reps or folks from our elected officials who are joining us. Once again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to make an announcement in Spanish. And so please hold on a second, then I'll come back in English. Buenos días. Esta reunión específicamente para hablar sobre Burbank y la presentación va a ser conducida en inglés, pero si prefería escuchar en español, puede hacerlo por Zoom. Haga clic en el icono que dice interpretación, escoja la opción para escuchar en español y enlace a la presentación en español que está disponible en el chat. Muchas gracias. Les voy a dar un momento aquí para que podrían tomar su información. Thank you. So let's start to talk about the project background and how we got here. So this is pretty much a Measure M $267 million project that is funded through Metro's Measure M and the SB1 gas tax to provide the total of $267 million to build this project. Its projected opening is 2024. Right now we're in 2021. That's right around the corner. So we're getting there. The draft EIR was released to the public review for comment just almost a year ago, towards the end of October of 2020 was when we released it for over 60 days of review and for comments. Then we provided the refinements by the Metro Board in May, specifically to approve the route, and that's what the Metro Board did. There were some refinements in Eagle Rock, including 2 design options for the segments on Colorado. Other minor refinements were in Burbank and Glendale. And the Metro Board, when they passed this in May, they let us know that they wanted us to work with these jurisdictions moving forward to continue as we prepared for the final environmental impact report. And because we've been working with these jurisdictions and we have more updates to share with you that were not previously discussed, we're here today to share those with you so you can see what the options are and also what the existing options are in Burbank, and provide your take input from you and also to take comments or questions so we can address those before moving forward to the completion of the final environmental impact report, which we expect to be sometime later this year, early next year. Going on to the next slide. where we are in the process, this is a good visual to show where we were. As I was saying earlier, we were a 64-day circulation period of the draft EIR, which is the Environmental Impact Report. Again, we released that last year from October through the end of December, collected and summarized all the public comments that were received. And then we received additional community input as we had updates in April to specifically talk about the Eagle Rock refinements. And here we are today talking about the Burbank refinements as well. So all this information is being taken into consideration as we prepare for the final environmental impact report and release, which again, we anticipate happening as early as late this year or early next year. And then after that, when we release the final EIR and recommend the project, the board will vote, and they can choose to approve and certify the project, and that's when it becomes an official project and we move into design and engineering, or they can come back with refinements, or they can, there's always any other considerations that the Metro Board does. So right now we are still reviewing additional community input and preparing for the final environmental impact report, which has not been completed yet. So with that, let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to introduce the project manager for this project. His name is Scott Hartwell. At the conclusion of the presentation, we'll be joined by our technical consultant from Kimley Horn, Brent Ogden as well, to be able to address any concerns or questions you may have about what was being presented today. And we want to make sure that we're here for the 2 hours here to answer your questions. So please jot down any questions you may have or share them through the Q&A function. And with that, I'm going to introduce Mr. Scott Hartwell to go from this point on.
Thank you, Tito. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Got quite a bit of project information to go through here this morning. I'm going to start out with a bit of background and kind of lay the groundwork as to why we're doing this and what the benefits are. So I'm going to start with project objectives. So really what we're trying to do is create this new premium transit option that really stands out in a way that provides a new high quality service that will not only retain existing riders, but attract new riders by offering a quality alternative to the automobile. This also goes hand in hand with Metro's own equity goals. Equity is a huge priority at Metro, and by really advancing transit along this corridor and creating this new option for existing and new riders, we're really able to move forward and advance our own equity goals. In addition to that, we want to provide quick and convenient access to major regional and local activity centers, employment, and enhance connectivity to the regional transit network. We'll have enhanced connections to several major Metro rail and bus lines. We'll be connecting with Burbank Metrolink as well over in downtown Burbank. And we're going to improve passenger comfort and convenience and support healthy communities and community planning initiatives through these high quality transit improvements for this project. So I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of bus lanes. So there's several components that really go into making BRT what it is, but one of, if not the most crucial component, are the dedicated bus lanes. So by getting the buses separated from traffic and into their own lanes, they're able to move a lot faster. So you get improved bus speeds and travel times, and also improve service reliability. And this last point, we can't emphasize enough. By allowing the buses to not be in traffic, they're no longer subjected to the swings in traffic congestion that you get at different times of the day, which would lead to varied travel times. So in their own lanes, the buses can have a lot more consistent run times, which is extremely important for transit riders. So when they show up to the station, they can be assured that the bus will show up when it's supposed to. So this will promote higher ridership, and the bus lanes themselves create more of a rail-like experience for the passengers. And the bus lanes also improve safety by removing conflicts between cars and buses. So I wanted to run through a couple examples of successful BRTs around the nation, one of which is the Cleveland Health Line. So this service, on this line, over half the corridor are dedicated bus lanes. And the service has seen a 58% increase in ridership compared to the previous local bus services that existed along this corridor before. In addition to that, the ridership projections were exceeded, and there are over 12,000 weekday boardings along this line. Travel times during peak period travel were reduced by about 25% compared to the previous lines that were along this corridor. Similarly, the Eugene, Oregon Emerald Express has also been successful. Over 2/3 of that corridor has dedicated bus lanes, and their 20-year ridership projection was actually exceeded in its very first year of operation. Ridership is about 50% higher than the local bus route that it replaced. So this is the proposed project for the NoHo to Pasadena project. This is an overall view of the route stretching from one end to the other. This is the route that, as Tito mentioned earlier, was approved by the board back in May. I won't go through every section of the project, just note some highlights. Over at the west end in North Hollywood, we connect with the Metro Red and Orange line. We've got a number of key stops in Burbank. As I think many of you are aware, Burbank Media District, Burbank Downtown Metrolink, Downtown Burbank, several key stops in Glendale, Eagle Rock, and then ultimately in Pasadena, where we connect with the Gold Line and terminate at Pasadena City College. Now, the focus today is going to be on the Burbank section, and actually even a subsection of the project in Burbank. But this is the overall route that you see in Burbank. It primarily runs along Olive. Now, one of the refinements that was approved by the board in May following the draft EIR release and comments we received was this minor reroute in the Burbank Media District on Olive, or on Alameda and Buena Vista to more closely connect with some of the medical facilities and studios over there. We also added a stop at Verdugo and Olive based on the public comments asking us to do that. We have a stop at Lake that will serve the Burbank Downtown Metrolink station. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then a couple of stops, one downtown and then one along Alameda and Glen Oaks. So moving on, well, I'm going to give a little bit of background. I'll sort of lay the context for the rest of the presentation. So as Tito mentioned, the board did approve the refined proposed project in May. It included the refinements that I just mentioned. But the route did also include curb running bus lanes. And so at that time, the board had approved curb running bus lanes for Olive, which is what was in the draft EIR. And really for most of the section in Burbank, curb running bus lanes are what are proposed. However, as Tito also mentioned, the board at that time directed staff to continue working with the cities, in this case, Burbank, to continue to address some of the remaining concerns, or the remaining concerns that the city had with the bus lanes as they were proposed. And the primary concerns are really the loss of street parking and the potential sidewalk narrowing that would occur on Olive for this particular stretch between Buena Vista and Victory. And so in response to these concerns, we have since introduced a new design option for this stretch that would convert one travel lane in each direction into side running bus lanes. And we're going to be talking about that here this morning. Also of note, one minor change, the BRT will be operating over the Olive Avenue Bridge to connect into downtown. However, we will not be operating in bus lanes on the bridge. We will be operating in mixed traffic conditions over the bridge. So the two design options that we now have for this stretch of Olive include the curb running, which we'll talk about, and of course the new side running option as well. Both options are being studied in the final EIR to an equal level of detail. So before we get into the design options, we also wanted to note the project's consistency with the city's existing plans and policies. We wanted to note that both bus lane options that we're going to talk about are consistent with the city's plans, including the city's general plan, where there's a lot of information in that and language relating to transit and the need to improve transit and create the most high quality transit options in Burbank as possible. Some of the language is bulleted here, including ensuring local transit is reliable, safe, and provides high quality service to key destinations, advocating for improved regional bus and BRT services linking Burbank's employment and residential centers to the region. We believe that the project goals and objectives go hand in hand with these goals, and that ultimately the project will advance these goals of the general plan, as well as for the complete streets plan, which was approved by Burbank in 2020. The project does adhere to many policies in that plan. And for example, the plan does actually designate Olive, Glen Oaks, and Alameda as transit priority streets. In addition to that, the plan also references side running and curb running bus lanes that should be considered within Burbank. So then getting into each of the options, we'll start with the curb running option. Now, again, you'll see we're focusing in on this one stretch between Buena Vista and Lake, which pretty much takes us up to the bridge, as you can see in that oval area there. Now, the rest of the project, I think we've addressed all the primary concerns and comments that we've received from the community and the city. So we're in pretty good shape with the rest of the project. It's this one area where we still have some remaining challenges that we need to work through prior to finalizing our EIR and making a recommendation. So the curb running option was really what was studied in the draft EIR. And the configuration is pretty straightforward. In this case, we would be converting the existing parking lanes into dedicated bus lanes. And the trade-offs are also straightforward. In the process of doing so, we eliminate the parking along the street for this stretch of Olive. However, we do preserve all 4 travel lanes. Now, another effect of this option is that it does require a bit of sidewalk narrowing, as you'll see in the cross section here. Now, typically, parking lanes for vehicles are about 8 feet, which is what they are for this stretch of Olive in Burbank, which is not wide enough for buses. We need at least 11 feet. So to get the extra space, it would require taking a couple of feet of sidewalk on each side of the street, and also taking a foot out of the outside travel lanes. Right now, the outside travel lanes are 11 feet, which is above standard. Bring them down to 10 feet. So you'd have uniform 10-foot width driving lanes. All 4 would be preserved, as I mentioned, as well as the center turn lane. And the buses would have 11-foot lanes. I should also say this represents sort of typical mid-block conditions for this stretch. Now, we do understand that the conditions will vary a little bit from block to block. The sidewalk widths do vary a bit. You have some instances where landscape median strips appear in the sidewalks with street trees. And so in some of these areas, there will be some additional design challenges that we'll have to work through, and we will in close coordination with the city. But this is the general configuration and vision for this stretch of Olive. So this is a bird's eye view of what the option could look like for Olive. This is looking from Olive and Buena Vista east. Now you'll see the bus lanes along the curb there shown in red. You'll notice the dashed areas that represents where vehicles are allowed to enter into the bus lanes in order to make right turns. So right turns will all be preserved. Vehicles will still be able to make them. They'll just get into the bus lanes at the appropriate area. And you'll also notice there's no bus lane in that block approaching Buena Vista in the westbound direction. That's because the buses actually have to make their way over into the left-hand turn lane, because service actually runs off of Olive to the west onto Buena Vista and ultimately onto Alameda, heading into the Burbank Media District. And so you'll see here, again, this is where the parking lanes would be replaced with the dedicated bus lanes. So then we'll talk about the side running option. So this option for the same stretch from Buena Vista to Lake would, instead of taking the parking lanes, would convert the outside travel lanes into dedicated bus lanes. Now, the trade-offs, again, are pretty straightforward. You do lose the one travel lane in each direction, but all parking is preserved. Another benefit to this option is that no sidewalk narrowing is required. As you'll see with the cross-section on the next slide, we're just replacing the outside travel lanes, sidewalks stay as is, but then the trade-off is the loss of the travel lane, which will result in some traffic effects and some diversion onto some of the other major streets, which we'll talk about in a minute. Also want to note, from a BRT standpoint, this is actually the optimal configuration. And the reason for that is because by getting the buses off the curb and into the outside travel lanes, it allows us to avoid some of the conflicts that curb running bus lanes have to deal with, including sharing the right turns with vehicles, as well as vehicles backing in and out of driveways. So one thing to note about the curb running option, all driveways will be preserved. People will be able to access them, but there could be some conflicts with buses having to wait for people to back in and out of those driveways. So this is the cross section for the travel lane conversion option or side running option. Now, this one's even more straightforward than the curb running in that all lane widths stay the same. We basically just replace the outside travel lanes that are 11 feet with 11-foot bus lanes. All parking remains. You see the curb parking there against the curb and the sidewalks, and then the inside travel lanes remain, as does the center turn lane. So this is, again, a rendering of what this option could look like. It's very similar to the curb running. Everything is pretty much the same, except that the buses are operating in the outside travel lane rather than in the curb lane. So you see the curb lane remains, street parking is shown here. So that's again, one of the biggest trade-offs is the street parking remains. So the next several slides are going to deal with talk about the traffic modeling results that we have that we wanted to share with you. We're going to start by talking about diversion. We did do a modeling effort using industry-wide standards to understand what the effects of traffic would be on Olive as well as on adjacent streets within Olive. And as we get to the Q&A, as Tito mentioned, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have on the methodology, how we arrived at these various numbers. But I'm going to start with giving you an overview of the traffic diversion that we analyzed. So in looking at the side running option, when you convert one travel lane in each direction, you essentially lose the capacity associated with that extra lane. So we needed to understand, okay, with the reduced capacity, what would happen with the existing traffic volumes? How many people would then leave Olive and where would they go? And what the modeling showed was that a range of 23 to 37% of existing traffic would actually divert away from Olive due to the travel lane conversion. And the reason for that range is it depends on which part of Olive you're talking about. Some parts would experience a higher rate of diversion than others. But this is quite a bit of overall diversion. And what we found is that most of these trips are diverting over to a few of the key major and secondary arterials in the area, including Alameda Avenue, Burbank Boulevard, and Hollywood Way. And the trips are being distributed relatively evenly across those three streets. The traffic volumes on those streets would increase by about 15 to 18% each. So we did an analysis to understand, okay, to what degree can these streets handle this additional traffic volume given their existing capacities and the existing levels of traffic on these streets. And so what we found was that these streets by and large do have the capacity to handle this amount of additional traffic without a sizable increase in congestion that anybody would notice. There would certainly be more traffic on these streets, but not to a level where it would dramatically slow down the performance of the streets. So one of the key takeaways from the diversion is that in Burbank, there are several different alternatives to get from one end of Burbank to the other. And I think the diversion lends support to that, where Olive is not the only way to get across Burbank. These other streets do offer a viable alternative to do so. And so that's what we're seeing with the diversion. We also wanted to note that in Verdugo, which is of course an important cross street on Olive, that we saw actually a small decrease in traffic volumes on Verdugo, which we attributed to the fact that Verdugo doesn't go through Burbank nearly as well as these other major streets do. And in fact, a lot of people are actually using Verdugo to get to Olive. So if by extension, they're not necessarily wanting to go to Olive to the same degree, well, then they're not necessarily going to Verdugo either. Also wanted to note that Magnolia Boulevard, which we know is a very important street for the community, actually had quite a little bit, just a small amount of traffic diversion onto Magnolia Boulevard. It didn't get near the amount of traffic volumes that these other streets are projected to get, which we think is primarily attributed to the fact that Magnolia doesn't have the direct connection to the I-5 that, say, Burbank Boulevard does. So these next several slides are going to talk about the travel time, the effects on traffic and bus speeds based on the modeling effort that we did. So this one is looking at travel times, and the format for each of these slides is pretty consistent. You'll see the same three colored bars here. The green represents no project, which is basically existing conditions. Now the modeling looked at traffic counts from 2019, so it was pre-COVID, and then they were projected based on projected growth factors to 2024. We use those traffic volumes, and so we've got the no project or existing conditions in green. We've got curb running bus lanes shown in orange, and then we got the side running bus lane, which is the travel lane conversion option, shown in blue. We'll show you AM and PM peaks, and it's also worth noting that these numbers include an average of both directions of travel. And we did that to sort of simplify the number of slides and the results for you. So we'll show you 3 different measurements, one for vehicles, one for local bus, which on this stretch includes primarily the Burbank Pink route and also some metro service, and then of course the BRT. So in starting with travel times for the vehicles, I think what first jumps out is that there's very little difference between the different options versus the no build for vehicles. Now we did round to the nearest half minute, but in general, they're pretty much the same travel times, about 4 minutes from Buena Vista to Lake. So that's the stretch that we're measuring with all these numbers, is from Buena Vista to Lake on Olive. And so no difference really between the no project and the curb running bus lanes. And I think what really jumps out is that there was no difference with the side running lanes, even with the travel lane conversion option. And so, a question that first I think popped into a lot of folks' heads is, well, why wouldn't you see an increased travel time if you're losing a lane of travel for vehicles? And there's really a couple of key explanations for that. One being the sheer amount of diversion off of Olive based on the diversion analysis that we did. So the traffic volumes are a lot less under this option. And then the modeling also takes into account some of the key improvements that would be planned as part of the project, including signal timing improvements for Olive, as well as transit signal priority for the buses. Now, with transit signal priority, for instance, a green light might be extended by several seconds to allow the bus to pass through, or a red light might be reduced so the bus doesn't have to wait as long. So the idea is the buses catch more green lights, spend less time waiting at red lights, and there can be a sort of spillover effect for vehicles traveling along Olive, where they get some of that same benefit with more green time along Olive. So between those two things, it really brought the side running bus lane travel speeds back towards existing conditions. So in looking at local bus, again, this is for AM travel time, about 6.5 minutes to make this particular trip from one end of Buena Vista to Lake, I should say, on Olive. And you'd see a bit of a travel time reduction under each option. One of the benefits of the bus lanes is that there's no queuing of traffic approaching intersections. Buses don't have to wait behind cars approaching intersections. They just go right up and through the intersection, which gives them that travel time benefit. For the BRT, of course, that's the more premium service. You get a bigger travel time benefit, about 5 minutes end to end under both options. And it's also just important to note that overall, the BRT is projected to reduce travel times by 24 to 29% compared to existing bus services that are available now. And it's also important to note that, again, it's just for this one little stretch. For people staying on the bus for longer stretches of the project, they'll get a cumulative benefit as they stay in bus lanes longer that are part of the rest of the project. And they'll get a cumulative benefit both from a travel time and a reliability standpoint. So moving on to PM peak. So you'll see a little bit more variation here. The PM numbers, the travel times tend to be a little bit longer because there's more congestion during the PM peak. And the way we looked at peaks, basically took the most congested hour period that was observed both for the AM and the PM. So the overall patterns here are pretty similar. No project, about 4.5 minutes for vehicles to get through. Actually, the time actually ticks up a little bit for the curb running option, which we attributed to some of the potential conflicts between buses and right turns that might slow vehicles a little bit at some of the intersections. And then the side running bus lanes actually produce a slightly faster travel time potentially compared to either option, including the existing conditions. Now, overall, these numbers don't really vary a whole lot. They're all pretty similar. And it's also worth noting that to the degree that Olive may ultimately be the preferred route for some of the for some vehicles, Now, when people see that the travel times and the congestion levels are not necessarily what they expected when the project opened, we may expect some vehicles to maybe return to Olive and bring the traffic volumes a bit back up, and overall kind of create an equilibrium between sort of the different options and the different streets along Burbank. But I think the writing's on the wall in terms of what the overall effect would be, that you get a fairly small difference in overall travel times and speeds between the different options compared to existing conditions. For local buses, you see the same pattern. Travel time overall is a little bit longer, again, because congestion's higher in the PM peak. That's for existing conditions. But then you see a greater benefit when the bus lanes are implemented, because again, you get the bus lanes out of traffic and the congestion all of a sudden isn't the factor that it otherwise was. And then for the BRT, of course, you see that same greater benefit. So we also looked at travel speeds for each of these services. For passenger vehicles, and we're able to get a little bit more precise because the numbers just in general are higher. So you could see a little bit of the difference between each of the options, but they are consistent with the travel times. Passenger vehicles right now average about 19 miles per hour getting through this section. That would tick up a little bit in the AM, the speeds for the curb running bus lanes, again, with some of the signal timing improvements. And then for the side running, it ticks up a little bit more, but overall, they're all pretty much right in the same range. They're all about the same. Local bus, you see a slight uptick in speeds. Curb running bus lanes, they enjoy a faster travel time. And then you'll see a variation where both for the BRT and local buses, they get a bigger travel time benefit, or a speed benefit, I should say, with the side running option, because again, there's less conflicts with vehicles operating in the outside travel lanes than compared to operating along the curb. And again, overall, you see the faster BRT speeds and just the greater overall benefit to the BRT under either option, really. So this is looking at PM. You see the same sort of patterns that we saw with the travel times. You see about 17 miles an hour, a bit slower for vehicles in the PM peak because of more congestion, and then the slight degrading of speed with the curb running, and then the actual increase in speed associated with the side running. And again, these numbers may kind of equal out a little bit more over time as people kind of adjust their driving patterns as to whatever works best for them. And for local buses, you see that same uptick, as well as for BRT. And so again, the benefits of the bus lanes are pretty clear. So then moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about parking. We know that's that parking is one of the most significant concerns, I think, from the community and the city's point of view. And we talked a bit about it already, but we wanted to break down some of the numbers for you. It's quite simple. It's a quite simple trade-off between the two options. We're showing you here the number of parking spaces between Buena Vista and Lake along Olive. We did do a parking inventory and assessment prior to COVID, where we went out, we quantified the number of spaces along Olive, and then we went out and observed the different rates of demand for that parking depending on time of day. We looked at weekdays, morning, midday, PM, afternoon, and then even on the weekends. And so we took the highest observed demand or rate of demand for this stretch of Olive, which came in at 58%. So that translates to a need of 174 parking spaces during the peak usage. The two columns to the right represent each of the two bus lane options, curb running and side running. Again, curb running, all of the parking is removed in this stretch to make room for the bus lanes. For the side running, all of it remains, all 299 spaces. And the column on the far right represents the alternative supply of parking that could exist on cross streets. So we did also quantify those spaces as well, all spaces within 300 feet of Olive on cross streets. So on street parking on these adjacent streets within 300 feet. And we counted 496 total spaces in this stretch. Now, in this area, we also took a look at land uses. They tend to be mostly commercial, institutional, multifamily, residential. And we took the 496 total and applied, if you were to then apply the peak demand that was observed on all of a 58%, then we concluded that there could be up to 208 spaces available for use as an alternative for folks looking for parking on Olive to help meet demand based on the occupancy rate of 58%. Also worth noting, we did take a look at the type of parking spaces. A lot of them have no restrictions, but a lot of them do. Some of them have time limits. So just something to note there. We also quantified the number of parking spaces available in private off-street lots. And there were over 1,000 spaces available, counted, I should say, for those lots in this area. So we're nearing the end of the presentation here. We wanted to kind of come back and summarize the key differences between the two options. I think we've touched on most of these. From a traffic standpoint, curb running option preserves all travel lanes, minimizing the effects on traffic, both on Olive and on adjacent arterials. The side running option does remove the one travel lane in each direction and will have some impacts on traffic. And we've talked about that. From a performance standpoint, the curb running option has a slightly reduced bus speed and reliability benefit, whereas the side running option maximizes bus speed and reliability. From a parking standpoint, curb running removes all street parking, whereas the side running option preserves all of it. From a sidewalk standpoint, curb running requires 1 to 2 feet of sidewalk width on each side of the street to be narrowed, or 2 to 4 feet total in order to make room for the bus lanes, whereas the side running option doesn't require any sidewalk space to be removed. Station platforms, we haven't talked about this yet. So one notable difference between the two, there's 2 stations in this particular stretch. One would be on Verdugo, the other would be at Lake. And so when we're talking about a curb running option, these stations essentially need to be located on the curb. So the station space, the footprint, the platform basically becomes more or less a shared space with the sidewalk. Now in this area, the sidewalks are fairly wide, so there could be some room behind the sidewalks, but generally speaking, you're going to have a shared space for pedestrians to either stop at the station or go through the station. Whereas with the side running option, by getting off the curb, we actually have that additional space where we could extend the curb out into the street by several feet. And what that allows us to do is to move the station platform forward and any structures associated with it, and then actually continue to route pedestrians who want to just pass by the station. They can be routed behind the station. So a bit of an advantage to the side running option there. Local bus service, I've mentioned this already, but I want to emphasize that local buses can share the bus lanes. That will include the Burbank Pink route. So they'll get that benefit as well. From a safety and customer experience standpoint, both options would include more or less the same enhancements to stations, including amenities such as shelters, lighting, real-time travel information that'll tell you when your next bus will arrive, benches, and also worth noting the Lake Station, which, as I mentioned, will be the key connection to the Burbank Downtown Metrolink station. That will include some first last mile improvements, probably in the form of enhanced lighting, wayfinding signage, that type of thing, to optimize the connection to Metrolink. So just to wrap up with next steps, we do, as Tito mentioned, we are working on the final EIR now, which we intend to release to the public. We'll cover both options again, and we'll release it to the public and take it to the Metro board for certification early next year, as well as ask the board to approve a final project route and a single option for Burbank. And when the board, if and when the board does approve the project, we will continue with preliminary engineering into an advanced level of design. And we'll continue to work through some of the remaining design challenges with the city as we do that. And as Tito mentioned, opening year for the project is 2024 per Measure M. So we've got our work cut out for us. And yeah, that concludes my presentation. So again, we'll see you for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And so right now, what we're going to do is, Scott, you'll stop sharing your screen, and then we'll have the next slide come up in a second. And as that next slide is being shared, I did want to acknowledge folks that have joined us representing your local elected officials. Want to start with locally for the city of Burbank, Vice Mayor Jess Telemontes has joined us. Thank you again for joining us. Again, I mentioned earlier, Dave Perry from the Office of Supervisor Catherine Barger. Thank you for joining us. And from the Office of Supervisor Hilda Solis, we have Alexander Sarno and Martin Reyes that have joined us today. Thank you for joining us. I also see from the Office of Mayor Eric Garcetti, Doug Mensman, who has joined us. So thank you all for joining us. We are getting ready to start the questions and comments. But before we do, let's briefly discuss the code of conduct. If we can go to the previous slide. So I just want to share this information that we want your feedback and input, and to provide a safe and equitable process during this meeting, we're asking for your help. So please, during the meeting, respect the format of the meeting, provide your comments. We want an opportunity for everyone to ask their questions and provide their comments. And you can do so, again, by providing your comments through the Q&A feature. Again, I don't see anybody joining via phone, but in the event that somebody is, then I just don't see them. They can text. You can text your questions or comments for those of you listening via phone at 818-650-0619. Again, we ask you to respect the format of the meeting, treat fellow community members, agency representatives, Metro staff, and others with respect. We're here to answer questions and take your comments. That's what we're here to do. And we thank you all that have been joining us, so we can make sure to have some open dialogue with you. So address all written questions to Metro staff and consultants. Please don't make any comments to anybody else's questions that were shared. We're here to answer your questions about what was just presented. Metro is committed to ensuring that all participants can fairly and clearly share ideas, questions, comments, and concerns about this project. So with that, let's go on to the next slide to talk about how to provide your questions and comments. Like I said earlier, the Q&A feature. Please go ahead and use that. We will line up the questions, and they will share them with me. We have staff in the background that's helping with this, again, so we can, in the event that people ask the same question, we'll group them together so we can make sure that everybody gets the answer. Again, you can, for those of you that are listening by a phone, in case I don't see you, please text us at 818-650-0619. Once again, 818-650-0619. And you can also send us any emails or comments at nohopasbrt@metro.net. And then we have the project voicemail at 213-418-3228. So with that, I see that we have some hands that have been raised. Just let you know that we are taking questions and comments via Q&A feature. If you are here and you were expected to hear information about other parts of the segment, this project does go through the communities of North Hollywood, Burbank, Glendale, Eagle Rock, and Pasadena. The two updates that we've had recently were for Eagle Rock and Burbank, as today we are focusing on Burbank. A couple weeks ago, on the 23rd, we had a meeting to discuss Eagle Rock. If you were unable to participate at the Eagle Rock meeting, you can go to the project webpage, and the meeting is available for you to view. It's hosted by YouTube, which is what will happen again for this meeting. We will provide this information on YouTube so you can view this meeting at a later time as well. The project webpage is metro.net/NoHoPassBRT. Once again, it's metro.net/NoHoPassBRT. And you can go into the document section where you will see all the documents that are available for the project, and there will be a YouTube link in there. So with that, let's get started with the first few questions that we have. With that, I'll ask Scott Hartwell, the project manager who just presented, to come up on stage, virtual stage, and Brent Ogden as well, our technical consultant here from Kimley Horn, to be prepared as we're going to ask the first question, which is, do you intend to replace, mitigate, or otherwise address loss of senior citizen loading zones that exist in front of low-income senior community that on Olive and will be lost as a result of the proposed project, given that there are no other loading areas, staging areas, or cross streets? I'm assuming this is regarding the curb running option on Olive Avenue. walking distance for these seniors residents. So Scott, can you address impacts to any loading zones that are specifically designated for senior housing?
Yeah, so yeah, Tito, you're right. It's where we have the biggest challenge is with the curb running option. For the side running option, as I understand it, the loading zones can pretty much remain as they are now. Basically, people would cross the bus lane and
Yeah.
get over to the curb and proceed with their loading zones. But yeah, with the curb running option, there is that additional challenge. I think the question already sort of thought about this to some extent. I mean, I think our first option is to see if there are adjacent side streets where we can relocate feasibly loading zones to allow people to load or goods to load and still have a reasonable or short distance to wherever they're going. If that's not the case, I know there are some different ways to address that. Brent, do you want to kind of elaborate on your experience with curb running BRT and how to address those loading zone issues?
Well, yeah, sure. If it's a white zone, which is really technically not for parking, it's just for dropping off and picking up. And if it's mid-block, it might be able to remain as such, and the buses would maneuver around it. Even when there's no parking allowed in the curb lane, there will still be things like Amazon trucks and mail delivery trucks and whatnot. And that's one of the issues with curb running lanes. But typically the buses, if they do encounter a vehicle blocking the lane, they maneuver around it.
All right, thank you, Brent and Scott. Let's go to the next question. Pretty much asking, what are the expected ranges in runtime from Pasadena to North Hollywood, and will Metro be developing segment run time based on the final proposed alignment or route?
Yeah, so we do have run times. We've adjusted them as we've kind of updated the options. Right now, the current expected run times from North Hollywood to Pasadena are a little bit over an hour. I think the latest is about 67, 68 minutes, somewhere in there to get from end to end. Now, I think it's important to note we don't anticipate actually most people even taking the trip end to end based on some earlier travel analysis that we've done. We've discovered that 2/3 of the trips that occur in this overall corridor are actually to destinations within the corridor as opposed to going to end. So we expect there to be a lot of the trips for the BRT might be from North Hollywood to Burbank, or from Burbank to Glendale, or from Burbank to Pasadena, those types of trips. But yeah, the overall runtime, as I mentioned, is a little bit over an hour. And we have those results broken out from segment to segment. We can do it that way, or station to station. Yeah, we'll continue to update those if the route or configuration does change.
And Scott, I would make a note that for the route options that were studied in the draft EIR, the segment run times are presented in Appendix X. There's an attachment to Appendix X, which is called Appendix A, which has segment by segment run times for those options.
Thank you. Next question is about the plan. And Scott, I guess it's the benefit for Burbank. What can you share what the benefits are for the project going through Burbank? And I know this is a question that goes back to earlier on in the process where we were determining where the project was going to run through. And as I stated earlier, we go through the communities of North Hollywood, Burbank, Glendale, Eagle Rock, and Pasadena. So can you share what the benefits are for Burbank specifically?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's several benefits for Burbank. I think one thing that we've always been cognizant of that we know is important to the city is the city has a high jobs to housing imbalance, a lot of employment located in Burbank. So we know that the population actually tends to swell during the day, and you get a lot of people coming in, a lot of congestion that results from that. But you don't necessarily have a lot of quality transit options to allow people to either get to Burbank or to travel within Burbank. And we see the BRT as one way to really address that issue with the major connections it has, both within the Burbank Media District to the Metrolink station over at downtown Burbank, and then through downtown Burbank, and then making those key connections to neighboring communities in Glendale and North Hollywood. And so through the bus lanes, you get that enhanced service, as well as some of the other BRT design features, the stations. the more of a rail-like experience that this service will provide compared to existing local bus services. So there'll be a benefit, as I mentioned, not just to existing riders, but we think we'll attract a lot of new riders, which will in turn help get vehicles off the streets. And then there's a number of benefits that we highlighted in the environmental impact report associated with reduced vehicle miles traveled, which is one of the big metrics for the EIR in looking at traffic. And with the reduced vehicles, it means less cars on your streets. It means better air quality, reduced greenhouse gas emissions. So yeah, a lot of benefits to be had, I think, for Burbank. Those are kind of touching on sort of the key ones.
Yeah, and Scott, also the ridership forecasting indicated there's a very high demand for people coming from the Red and Orange Line station, North Hollywood, and using the service to get over to the Media District.
Thanks, Scott and Brent. And if I can also add a little additional information, I know that I'm noticing a different pattern or in different trends in the current generation that less youth are getting their licenses and choosing to take public transit or other means of transit. And I think one of the big benefits of this is that we are going green with these buses that we release. So again, it's a overall a better incentive for people to ride these buses that are going to be most likely electric. There are other alternatives to going green, but electric has been the main option that I've been seeing. And when I mean electric, I mean battery operated, which we have recently launched for our Orange Line recently, the G line, which is all electric now. And if you want to check out how these new electric buses are running, just go check them out at our North Hollywood station, where you will see that our fleet is completely electric now. Here's another question about Olive Avenue and how will Metro overcome some blockades to bus flow on Olive? I'm assuming this is for the curb running option for blockades, because I would just think that for the side running, there are less blockades, given that you're not sharing the right turn lane or other possible stops that would be happening during the use of the side running versus the curb running. So can you address that?
To be honest, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question.
Yeah, it was pretty much asking how Metro overcome some blockades to bus flow on Olive, and that was pretty much the question. And I'm just trying to see if they mean blockades that maybe cars stopped on the curb running or something like that. Again, I could only assume based on what the question says, but that seems to be what they're asking about. So I think this is more pertaining to curb running, but you never know. There may be blockades on the side running, but I wanted to see if you can address that.
Yeah, so I'll say that, yeah, you're right, Tito. There are more conflicts between vehicles and buses with the curb running option. I touched on those throughout the presentation. You do get people, as I said, coming in and out of driveways. That can be an issue. Loading zones that we talked about, those that would remain on Olive potentially would require buses to maybe route around into the general traffic lanes to get around vehicles. There's also the issue of bus lane enforcement, and that's a whole different can of worms that we're working on, including people illegally parking in the lanes. And we are working on potential enforcement methods for that, which could include actually equipping the buses with cameras and allowing tickets to be sent out via law enforcement for vehicles that are parking in the bus lanes. And yeah, with the outside travel lanes being used as part of the side running option, some of those conflicts are avoided. Cars are not allowed into the bus lanes in that scenario either, unless they're crossing to make a turn or to get over to the curb, then it's fine. And yeah, between signal timing improvements and the bus lanes themselves, which keep cars generally out of the bus lanes, the buses should flow pretty smoothly through them. If the question is pertaining to actual physical barriers for the bus lanes, none are really planned for this stretch. There's not really enough right of way to put like any kind of curb to keep people from getting into the bus lanes. And generally, I don't think that would be advisable anyway, since people will need to access them to get over to the curb or to make a right turn. So I think the bus lanes will pretty much just be within the existing street footprint with painted lanes, and buses would operate in them as such.
Thanks, Scott. I'll provide a follow-up question to that. As you said, the buses will be able to use the bus lanes. This is more than just the BRTs that can use the bus lane in this configuration, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. With this type of configuration, with either one, with curb running or side running, it works well for the local buses. They'll continue to use their own stops, as I think people are generally aware, they stop much more frequently than the BRT will. They'll still be able to access those stops, and then they'll just get right back in the bus lanes and continue in them along their route for those stretches where they go alongside the BRT.
All right, thank you. Here's a question about the Olive Bridge. There's currently a gridlock on the bridge on Olive. Is there a plan to place a stop on the bridge? I know that initially we were considering that, but can you explain what's the latest on that?
Yeah, I certainly can. So yeah, there is some history on that. And so to provide some background, when we initially worked with the city prior to developing the draft EIR, we ultimately had recommended a stop at the top of the bridge at that time. And then, from there's an existing elevator on the north side of the bridge. And so people could get off the bus, use the elevator to get down to the Metrolink station. We did ultimately come up with a plan for a stop like that at the top of the bridge in the draft EIR. It is reflected in the draft EIR. What it would have consisted of was a platform on both sides of the bridge and a crosswalk. We had actually proposed a signalized crosswalk at the top of the bridge to allow passengers on the south side. So basically people exiting the bus or getting on the bus in the eastbound direction to then be able to cross the bridge safely and get over to the elevator on the north side of the bridge in order to access the Burbank downtown Metrolink station. So when the draft EIR was released, the city came back with a number of concerns with what we had proposed that were primarily related to the age and the design of the bridge, and their basic concern was questioning whether it would be feasible to install the infrastructure needed for a proper station at the top of the bridge. Again, given the age and the design of the bridge, especially the signalized crosswalk, and being able to install a signal could be challenging, if not infeasible altogether. So in light of these various concerns that the city had, we ultimately decided to shift the station off of the bridge and just directly to the west, right before the bridge starts over at Lake. From there, it's a relatively short walk to the Metrolink station at street level. As I said, we would include some first last mile enhancements to allow for a more seamless pedestrian connection between the two. And it was also understood that in order to ultimately accommodate a station at the top of the bridge may ultimately need to be widened, and in order to accommodate the infrastructure necessary to have a station at the top of the bridge. And widening is something that is simply, we can't include as part of our project. It's beyond the scope of the project. But what we did say is that ultimately, if we're able to, if the bridge widening ultimately does happen and the city is able to move forward with that, then we would certainly be able to work with them to relocate the station on Lake back to the top of the bridge, at which point it could be feasible. So that's the plan for now. The station at Lake could be looked at in some sense as an interim station until a bridge widening may ultimately occur. But right now, because of the reasons I mentioned, we're proposing to stop at Lake.
All right, thanks, Scott. Here's a question about side running option. Have you considered taking into consideration new housing units and their impacts on Olive? Is there any proposed housing that's going on Olive that could, I guess, provide any impacts to the to Olive?
Brent, I'd like to ask you to maybe weigh in on that and the degree to which the environmental impact report looked at potential housing developments and new growth along the corridor.
Right, all the projected growth that's in the general plan is included in the metro model. So, that traffic is already reflected in the base projections, with or without the project. Of course, with the project, some of those new residents would be able to use bus stops along Olive too. So, does have some benefits.
All right, thank you. Here's a question about the 501, that which is is one of the projects that is mostly freeway running, that does connect through Burbank. So what about the Buena Vista Alameda intersection? Will the 501 continue to operate? There are currently 5 bus routes using this intersection. There are serious problems already with vehicles accessing the hospital and medical buildings.
So I'll speak to the 501 route a little bit, and then I'll ask Brent to kind of weigh in on sort of what's going on there from a traffic perspective and how the BRT might work. The 501, there is some overlap with the project. It obviously goes from North Hollywood to Pasadena, and as was mentioned, it's primarily on the freeway, but does get off to serve the Burbank Media District. Now, my understanding is that through NextGen, there is some proposed changes to that route, some potential rerouting. Now, whether that line ultimately remains, I think, is still a little bit up in the air. I think, and waiting to see how our project ultimately moves forward. I think once we implement the project and get closer to construction, I think a more firm determination will be made on what happens to the 501. But Brent, do you want to sort of comment on the circulation of the BRT in that area?
Sure. Well, the bus, along Alameda, the bus would be operating in mixed flow, just using the existing uh, marked lanes on the street. There's an existing stop at Naomi, which would be expanded to accommodate the BRT stop. We would be maybe doing a little bit of restriping on Buena Vista in the southbound direction to provide a bus and right turn lane to facilitate that movement. We may be able to put an eastbound bus turn lane in also on Alameda, but some of that needs to be looked at as we do more design work on the project.
All right, thank you. And I think on a similar note, where this is a question here about student drop-offs, are you taking away the student drop-offs in front of St. Finbar's School? And are you taking away parking in front of St. Finbar's Church that is used for handicap drop-off and funeral services? I think this is pertaining to the curb running and as to what impacts there would be to what is already there, or whatever, what is already being utilized in front of the school and church.
Yeah, so I mean, I think just getting back to the curb running versus the side running. With the side running, I think those types of activities, drop-offs, loading, unloading, would remain pretty much as they are now. The curb running, where we do have curb running bus lanes, well, again, the first option that we'll look at is if there's an adjacent side street where those activities could be relocated. And if not, we'll look at other alternatives, including potentially allowing some of the loading zones to potentially remain as they are. And those will kind of be handled on a case by case basis as we move forward with design.
All right, thank you, Scott. And again, as we were saying, that right now, today we presented 2 options. We presented a side running option and the what was also presented prior, which was a curb running option. And when I say side or curb running, I'm talking about a bus lane for this bus rapid transit project, which again, each one has a trade-off. The curb running is pretty much parking, and for the side running, it is converting an existing travel lane to a bus lane on Olive Avenue. Again, if you have questions, if you're joining us via telephone, you can text us your questions at 818-650-0619. If you are in the audience participating with us, you can use the Q&A function to either ask us questions or provide a comment. Again, we are taking your comments and we are jotting your comments down. Again, we're not reading the comments, we're only reading and responding to questions. Again, we are in the in-between phase between the, we released the draft environmental impact report a year ago, and we're getting ready to release the final environmental impact report, but we did want to share some developments on the project and a new side running option that had not been discussed prior with everybody here. So with that, let's talk about the frequency that BRT buses will run on Olive. What's the frequency that they would run? How often will the BRT travel down Olive on Monday through Friday during the day versus evenings and weekends? There's more. They're wondering about frequency as a proposal is a significant rerouting of pedestrians and traffic for local residents. Will bus frequency be at all times of the day, at night, to justify these major changes that could affect the quality of life for those that are on Olive and adjacent, as well as residents who travel around Burbank? It's quite a bit of questions, but I think it's all about, let's go and talk about the frequency of the BRTs. We'll do hourly and then go from that point on.
Sure, yeah. So the frequencies for the BRT on weekdays would be at 10-minute frequencies all day. So basically from the beginning of the morning rush to the end of the PM rush, the hours, I think, and then they're subject to adjustment as we get closer to opening, but I think the assumptions we used was 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Thereabouts, and they would run at 10-minute frequencies again all day. And then kind of tapering off as the evening goes down to 15 minutes, and then later into the evening down to 20. The weekend service would be a little bit lower frequencies, I think topping out at about 15 minutes and then going down to 20. And then I think the lowest frequency on Sundays during late hours would be, I think, about 30 minutes, if I remember correctly. So that they do vary a little bit, but I think the key is the all day 10-minute frequencies. So get a consistent benefit for the bus riders during those times. As far as circulation on local streets, and I can address that as well, I think we don't anticipate a whole lot of circulation challenges on those streets. And for one thing, from a traffic diversion standpoint, those local streets don't really provide any through access that would be an alternative to Olive. I think we expect most of the trips through the single lane option to divert over onto these major and secondary arterials that I mentioned earlier. As far as sort of the curb running bus lane, you may get some people looking for alternative parking on those side streets, but again, we anticipate, based on the street spaces available for those first 300 feet, that most of the parking demand would occur pretty close to Olives. People wouldn't be necessarily driving further down the street looking for parking.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Go on to the next question. And again, this is about parking. How does the estimated parking spaces available compare to the projected total demand with the new bus service in place? And then there's a follow-up. Is additional parking part of the plan around the stops?
Well, maybe this would be a good opportunity to go back to that parking slide. Yeah. We can talk through that a little bit. I think it's you skipped it. It's after all the traffic analysis. There it is. Okay, so yeah, we did quantify the number of spaces on Olive as well as on the side streets within 300 feet. 299 spaces counted in total, both directions. So with the highest peak demand observed, that would translate to a need of 174 spaces. So and then looking at the alternative parking supplies within 300 feet on side streets at 496, we applied that same parking occupancy rate of 58%. Now, ideally, we would have liked to observe the occupancy rates for the side streets when we did the parking analysis, but unfortunately, COVID struck before we could do that. And so we didn't want to do an occupancy rate once COVID started. So that's why we applied the same 58% to the side streets, which would leave 208 spaces potentially available. So in looking at the gap and just doing the math, 299 existing, peak demand of 174, The 208 spaces would certainly exceed the 274. And as far as the spaces themselves, as I mentioned, some of them have time limits, some of them don't. And kind of getting back to the prior question about circulation on some of these streets and some of the concerns that we've heard from the community about people looking for parking on these side streets. I think one thing to keep in mind, the city of Burbank does have a neighborhood protection plan as part of their general plan. I think we could certainly work with the cities to kind of come up with recommendations for maybe adjusting some of the parking regulations along some of those side streets, whether it means implementing more time limits where maybe there's no restrictions now, or even allowing some permitting for existing residences, permit only type stops. I mean, there's a lot of different things that can be done to sort of address the parking challenges associated with the curb running option.
Right, and Scott, many of these blocks have the alleyway behind the businesses along Olive, and so the most popular parking for someone who wants to go to a business on Olive is going to be right around the corner, in between that alley and the actual main street.
Thank you, Brenton. Scott. Again, if you have questions or comments, please use the Q&A feature so we can take your questions and comments. We are reading your questions. We are grouping any questions that are similar so we can be able to answer as many questions as possible that are different from each other. We are acknowledging that we are receiving quite a bit of questions, but I want you to continue to submit your questions or comments as we are here meeting with you until 1 o'clock today. And we'll also be here at 5 o'clock in the afternoon providing the exact same information and same presentation that we provided just today or this hour, and we'll be doing that again at 5 o'clock all over again. So if you have to drop off or you miss some parts, you can come back at 5 o'clock and catch this presentation again. It will be uploaded to the project webpage at metro.net/NoHo Pass BRT. The presentation will be uploaded, as well as the video recording. Video recording usually takes about a day or two to process and upload. So I would expect this up sometime Monday at the latest. So thank you again for your patience, and thank you for joining us. Again, we do want to take your questions and comments. If you are via phone listening in, I don't see anybody, but again, I may have missed something. Please text your questions or comments at 818-650-0619. That's 818-650-0619. Let's go on to the next question. This one's about curb running. How would a possible curb running option affect intersections with local streets and the ability to safely navigate the corridor? Would turn movements be restricted for a curb running option?
So I'll just say on a high level that turning movements are expected to continue more or less as they are under that option. Again, on Olive, vehicles would be able to get into the bus lanes in order to make their right turns. Brent, do you want to maybe elaborate a little bit on how overall turning restrictions or lack thereof might play into the curb running lane?
Well, I mean, there wouldn't be restrictions. The right turns would be accommodated from the bus lane, and actually one other benefit that you do get with the curb running bus lane is that someone who's turning onto Olive and making a right turn can actually make a tight right turn and then use that bus lane to merge into the general traffic flow, because it is legal for someone to use the bus lane for maneuvering. They're just not allowed to actually go through an intersection. The signalized intersection is a through movement in the bus lane.
All right, thank you. Here's a question about downtown. How does the downtown portion of this plan align with the downtown Burbank specific plan?
So I'll speak a little bit about the configuration through downtown, and then I'll ask Brent to kind of weigh in on that. So if you're going east, once we pass Lake under either option, right, whether it's a side running with the travel lane conversion or the curb running, once we get to the bridge, we merge into mixed traffic conditions where there's 2 travel lanes in each direction. We'll cross over the bridge in that condition and basically kind of use that bridge to kind of transition over to the right side where we're actually going to convert into curb running bus lanes through downtown. So that part of the project has been approved by the board, operating along the curb up to Glen Oaks, where we then turn right and continue into Glendale. So they will be converting the parking lane into dedicated bus lanes through that stretch. Brent, do you want to kind of talk about its relationship to the specific plan?
Well, I mean, the number of parking spaces that would be removed from the curb running is around 40 or something. And, that clearly that's a very small number compared to most of the parking downtown is in lots and structures because, it's very heavily used, the on-street parking. But, many times you end up in a structure if you're trying to park downtown. So it won't really change that condition too much. We are being consistent with the existing bus stop at San Fernando. We're going to enlarge that stop, and it'll be a location where transfers, can be used by the city buses as well as by the BRT services. So it'll really provide a good point of connectivity in the downtown for buses.
All right, thank you. And on a similar note, this question we asked earlier, it was a follow-up, Scott, but maybe again we should. This is now standalone. Wanted to ask about use of the dedicated bus lanes. Can the dedicated bus lanes be used by local buses? And here's another question or another option. Can they also be used by Metro Micro, which is a service that Metro has that has smaller vans that's providing access to and from areas in the areas of Burbank and North Hollywood. So can you address again or clarify, Scott, again, who can use the BRT lanes or the bus lanes?
Yeah, so certainly any local bus can use the bus lanes, whether it's the Burbank Peak Route or in other sections of the project, LA DOT, Pasadena Transit, if you come to the west a bit. So yeah, local buses can use the bus lanes. And as far as microtransit goes, that's a conversation. I think we had some high-level conversations with them in the past about that. I think the short answer is yes, we probably would be fine with that. But that's something I think we would have to sort of confirm with microtransit once we move forward with the project.
All right, thank you. Here's the next question. So it's about the traffic modeling. What does the traffic model say about traffic diverting onto adjacent residential streets through the Lake Buena Vista segment?
And Brent, do you want to take this one?
Well, we sort of already went over it. This is talking about traffic diversion. I mean,
it's specifically to yes, but this one's to Lake Buena Vista segment.
Well, I mean, so from Buena Vista to Lake is the entire zone. So, I mean, what was presented before about the traffic diversion in terms of about a 20 to 30% plus diversion off of Olive is sort of what we're looking at. We're looking at that would be diverted to arterial roadways that basically bypass that entire segment. So that's why we don't expect to see a lot of traffic going onto local streets, because people that want to go the whole length of Olive are typically wanting to get across the freeway, so they'd be attracted to Burbank Boulevard. The ones that want to go north might use Hollywood Way, etc. So we really don't anticipate a lot of diversion at the local streets.
All right, thanks, Brent. And again, when you say arterial, the roads are classified into different segments, but can you provide a little more background as to what is considered an arterial lane?
Well, typically four lane roadways with left turn pockets. I know Magnolia, isn't going to get as much diversion onto it because it has a one lane westbound situation, but so it's not probably going to be affected very much. But again, the ones that would be picking it up would primarily be Burbank Boulevard and Hollywood Way and Alameda.
Okay, thank you, Brent. Next question. What is the current plan for the other segments of Burbank? Or what are the current plans for the other segments of Burbank? Well, I think we shared most of the plan. I think mostly talking about Olive, but there's a small segment that connects Glen Oaks to Glendale. So let me continue on with the questions a little bit extra. Also, are there any options for the building over street bus rails so that there are no permanent impacts on parking or traffic? Let me read that again. Also, are there any options for building over street bus rails so that there are no permanent impacts over street bus rails? I'm guessing, double stacking the roads or something. I'm having a hard time understanding that question. So let's first go and talk about the other segments in Burbank that if we can just provide a little bit more update as to, what other segments that we didn't discuss, which I think we just didn't, we focused mostly on Olive, which is mostly through Burbank, with the exception of when it turns right on Glen Oaks from Olive, right? Scott, can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. In fact, this may be another good opportunity to go back a few slides. You can either bring up the overall project, but actually what might be helpful is bringing up either one of either the side or the curb running, because it actually sort of color codes the route a little bit, allows me to speak to it a little bit easier.
Talking about slide 10, I think.
Where go back one slide, we can see it. Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so yeah, the Burbank section, the whole section is shown here. Obviously today we focused on the section from Buena Vista to Lake along Olive. That's where the two design options differ. But for the rest of the project, yeah, I can walk through that. So coming in from North Hollywood, we come in off the SR 134 and get off at Pass. We kind of make our way onto Olive via Riverside, and we have a stop over there at Hollywood Way. And then we continue in curb running bus lanes for that stretch onto Alameda. And so, as Brent mentioned, on Alameda and on Buena Vista, we're still kind of working out exactly sort of what the bus lanes are going to be block by block. I think there'll be some curb running stretches generally, and then there'll be a potential protected left turn pocket turning north onto Buena Vista. And then from there, and then we have a stop at Naomi. And then from there, we continue along Olive through either one of the two design options, curb or side running. And then, as I mentioned earlier, as we get over as we pass the Verdugo station and then ultimately the Lake station, we get onto the Olive Avenue Bridge. That'll be in mixed traffic conditions, so no dedicated bus lanes along the bridge. From there, we transition into a curb running configuration for that remaining portion on Olive through downtown Burbank, where we have a stop at San Fernando. From there, we turn southeast along Glen Oaks, and we'll be back in a mixed traffic condition as shown in red. Everywhere you see red is a mixed traffic condition. And this was actually another refinement that we made following comments on the draft EIR. There were some concerns about this section and some of the potential impacts to parking and the sidewalks. But most importantly, we determined that we kind of needed a lot of the space to transition into the center running configuration that we get as we continue along Glen Oaks into Glendale, right around Providencia, approaching the border with Glendale. The route, the street, Glen Oaks, starts to really widen, and that's where those big medians appear. And we're in 3 lanes of traffic, so we're able to then convert the inside travel lanes adjacent to the median into dedicated bus lanes that we use all the way along Glen Oaks into Glendale. So as we turn onto Glen Oaks, this mixed traffic condition that you see in red allows us to sort of allows the buses to make their way over into those inside travel lanes and then pick up the bus lanes again at Providencia. So that's the total Burbank section right there.
All right, thanks, Scott, for sharing the segment. Again, at the bottom of the screen, the dotted line it represents the 134 freeway, and then solid is the street running option. Let's go on to the next question. Again, I am not as familiar with the second part of the question, asking are there any options for building over street bus rails so there are no permanent impacts to parking or traffic? I would only think that it's asking about another type of alternative. If you think any differently, Scott or Brett, let me know. But I don't think there's any other alternatives that we've been looking at that don't involve street use.
It sounds like it's talking about an aerial structure, but we're certainly not proposing an aerial structure.
Yeah, we're not proposing any kind of grade separation where we bring the buses above the street. In this section, along with every section of the project, we're operating on on city streets. So we'll be operating, again, either in an existing travel lane or along the curb. Every section is different. We have different configurations. As I mentioned, we've got some center running configurations, bus lanes that operate adjacent to medians where there's wider sections of streets. And then we have, of course, curb and side running configurations. Every stretch of the project is different based on the unique challenges and opportunities with that street and available right of way. So that's kind of how we came up with the project, trying to work with what works best, not only for the buses, but also with the communities and their various priorities and concerns.
Thank you, Scott. Here's a question about the senior transportation. Burbank offers a dedicated bus. I think when they say that, they refer to the city of Burbank offers a dedicated bus for senior transportation throughout the city. This is a great resource for local errands, medical appointments, etc. How will Metro work with senior transportation? And again, they said this is a dedicated bus for senior transportation. So if it's a dedicated bus that Burbank runs, I would assume they could also use the bus lanes. Correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay. I know that's a short answer. Is there anything? Let's see what the second part is. Well, how will Metro work with senior transportation? We're working with Burbank Transportation Offices. Again, if this is a Burbank run service, then we are coordinating with the city of Burbank and their staff, especially the transportation offices regarding this project. Correct?
That's absolutely true. I mean, we'll coordinate with anyone and everyone that we need to in order to make this project work as best we can with the community, whether it's with senior transportation options, certainly, as you said, with the city of Burbank, with Burbank Bus, we'll be working closely with them. And we still have a lot of work to do. I mean, this lays out the basic configuration of the project. That's what we're studying in the EIR, but we're still at a pretty limited level of design, and we're only at about 5% design for this portion of the corridor. So as we continue to advance design, there's still a lot of details to work out and some refinements that we'll have the flexibility to make after the board approves the EIR and we get into preliminary engineering. So yeah, we'll have all those coordination with the different groups and transportation services to make sure that it works for everybody.
Thank you, Scott. Here's a question about who's making the decision. What will be the deciding factor on selecting curb running versus side running, the two options we presented today?
Yeah, so there'll be a lot of factors that go into that. So the way this is going to work, we're going to take the feedback that we received here today from the two meetings, the comments that we've received, and all the feedback that we've received via email and on the project to date and on these two options. We'll look closely at what people are saying, what the preferences are. And so we'll take that into consideration along with what we think will work best with the BRT, given some of the different challenges that we're working with. And staff will come up with a recommendation. So we'll, as staff at Metro, recommend one of the two options based on all the feedback and other considerations. And that'll be included in the staff report as we release the draft EIR. Now, the draft EIR itself, as I mentioned, will include both options and it'll evaluate them neutrally. So ultimately, it'll be up to the board when the board is asked to approve a final project to select one of the two options. They could either go with the staff recommendation or they could select the other option. And so it's really up to them ultimately. But it's the Metro board that will make a decision on the final configuration of the project. But it's also, we want to point out that it's really important that we get acceptance from the city as well and from the community. I mean, these are city streets. We are operating on city right of way. So it's important that we continue working closely with the city and that we come up with a configuration that works well from the city's perspective.
And when this goes before the Metro board, people will also have an opportunity to provide comment to the Metro board. And again, if you are part of the project database, you will receive notification when the project will go before the Metro board. If you are not already on the project database, please email us You see it on your screen. It is NoHo Pass BRT at metro.net. And please, on the email, just put, please add us to the project database, and we will add your email to the project database to receive correspondences regarding this specific project moving forward. Again, once again, this project will be going before the Metro Board, and when it does, you will have an opportunity to participate. Right now, the Metro Board is still meeting online virtually, just as we are here today, and we anticipate that happening for the next couple of months. Should that change, again, we will provide the information as to how to participate when we submit the project information, but also when we send the e-blast out to you, letting you know how to participate before the Metro Board with this project. We have a little bit less than half hour left of this meeting. We have a few more questions. Again, if your questions haven't been answered, or you would like to provide comment, please do so using the Q&A feature. If you are listening via telephone, please text us at 818-650-0619. Again, we are here until 1 o'clock, and then we'll be back again at 5 o'clock to present this information all over again. And you can see the presentation, and we'll take your questions and comments again at 5 o'clock later this afternoon. Okay, what is the next question here? Let me see. Is there any consideration for widening Olive as an alternative?
Well, if the question is to add travel lanes to Olive, then no. The answer is no. I think the right of way is pretty constrained as it is for the rest of the corridor. We've got a lot of businesses and other land uses that go right up to the sidewalk, and sidewalks go right up to the curb. So no, widening Olive to fit in additional travel lanes is something that would be infeasible for us for a number of reasons. Cost, impacts to the corridor. Yeah, we wouldn't consider that. Now the curb running bus lane option, as I mentioned, does sort of widen the curb to curb width of Olive by up to about 4 feet for the stretch that we talked about in order to make the bus lanes fit in the curb running lanes. But that would be the extent of any widening.
Thanks, Scott. I think that's probably that might be what the question was about, as far as widening just to add an extra lane for the BRT. Thank you for answering that. Here's a question about bikes, asking how will bikes traverse on Olive? I'm assuming they're asking how will they traverse with the BRT project.
Sure. Yeah. So bikes, there's nothing to preclude bikes from being able to use the bus lanes. So there's no bike lanes on Olive now. There won't be separate dedicated bike lanes on Olive with the project. However, the bikes will have access to the bus lanes.
All right, thank you. Here's a question that's a little bit opposite of one of the earlier questions about going aerial, but why not go underground like a subway with this project? What are the challenges with something like that, or why isn't this being considered?
Sure. So the project has $267 million in Measure M funds. We believe that's enough money to build a robust BRT. That's really one of the reasons that we're moving forward with BRT here and elsewhere through LA County, is that bus rapid transit is really meant to offer a lot of the same benefits to a rail that you'd see with the rail project in terms of speed, reliability, moving people, a lot of people quickly and conveniently between key activity centers. So it operates a lot like a rail line. It kind of looks like a light rail line with the bus lanes and the rail-like stations, but it can be done at a fraction of the cost that a rail line can do, let alone a subway. I mean, subways are hundreds of millions of dollars a mile. We simply don't have the budget to consider rail, let alone subway, which is more expensive even than, say, at-grade rail because of the tunneling costs. So BRT was always the goal here, given the budget and given the Measure M expenditure plan. And so that's what we're focused on. And we think we can deliver a really nice project with BRT within budget that works well for both the transit riders and the community.
Thank you, Scott. Here's a follow-up question about parking. And I'm guessing that if we go to slide 17, that might help better explain, or when you provide your answer. But every time you need to park, do you have to cross the bus lane? I'm sorry, is that the right? Yes. go back to more?
It's
That,
no parking. Wait, are you talking about parking, the parking slide?
yeah, so, well,
It's
no,
after.
17, because they're asking every time you need to park, do you have to cross the bus lane? And I'm assuming that's for side running versus curb running, because curb running, there isn't any parking. Side running, there is a parking. And if you see the vehicles there, they're separated by a BRT lane. So I would think that's the question. And how would that work if you're trying to park with the BRT lane there?
Yeah, so with the side running bus lane, you're correct. So I think, and Brent, feel free to jump in, but generally the answer is yes. A vehicle would cross the bus lane in order to get over to the curb lane to park. Or Brent, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a vehicle is turning onto Olive, making a right turn, then they may, if they're looking to immediately park, then they can potentially avoid the bus lane altogether. But generally, you have to cross the bus lane in order to park, and that will be allowed for that use.
Right, and the bus lane, will generally, it'll, allow a car to park or unpark without impacting the remaining travel lane. So all the impacts of parking maneuvers will be no longer, affecting the mixed flow lanes.
Understood. Thank you both. And I guess we can use the same scenario for going into and out of driveways as well.
Yes,
You would cross the BRT lane, but again, that is allowable, and again, you just maneuver around whatever traffic is going on already, or on the existing general purpose lane. Correct?
yes.
Okay. Here's one question more about parking. Regarding the survey of available parking spots, what time of day was used to complete the survey? And was this during COVID when this traffic was vastly reduced? Their practical experience of trying to park and shop during peak hours does not reflect this vast availability of parking.
Yeah, so I can touch on some of those, and then I'll let Brent expand on anything he feels is necessary. But the parking analysis, the entire analysis was done pre-COVID, so that was before the shutdown and all of that. So we went and looked at different times of day. Actually, we did a morning inventory, a midday, and an afternoon, evening inventory for the weekdays. We looked at different times of day on the weekends as well. And basically, out of all the different times we looked at, we took the peak demand observed, which was 58%. And so that's how we came up with the peak demand. Again, it was all done COVID. The one thing we were not able to do before COVID struck was do a demand analysis on the side streets. So we were able to quantify the number of spaces available on side streets, but we were not able to do a demand assessment before COVID hit. So that's why we applied the same 58% to come up with the 208 spaces that could be available for side streets, just with the basic logic that if the demand right on Olive was at a peak 58%, then the demand right adjacent to Olive within 300 feet would probably be in that same ballpark.
And I would add that the peak parking demand typically, was either weekday afternoon or Saturday midday.
All right, thank you. Next question is, will each city have control during implementation to brand their segment of the project more closely aligned to their city's vision? Who will be responsible for maintaining the project?
Yeah, so the first question is a little bit broad. I don't know exactly how to answer that. I mean, yes, we do recognize that every city has its own branding. If that's a matter of branding the stations, we are going to have a uniform design for the stations. Now, whether that allows for some additional branding by city, it may. We're not there yet. We have not designed the stations yet. That's sort of the next phase. But I can tell you that as we move forward with designs, both with the station and the rest of the project, we will work closely with the city to make sure that we accommodate their needs and desires to the furthest extent that we can. As far as maintenance goes, what we're saying and what we're committing to doing is that this is really more like a rail-like project, even though it's out on city streets. The expectation is that we will maintain the stations and the project overall. Now, how exactly we maintain it, whether we provide some funding to the city to help them, say, maintain the bus lanes, or we maintain maybe with our staff the stations themselves and get some kind of easement worked out with the city to do that. But we'll ultimately probably enter into some kind of agreement to work it out. But yeah, the expectation is that Metro overall will be responsible for the maintenance of the project.
All right, thank you, Scott. Here's a question about the curb running option. In the curb running option regarding side street parking near Olive, what about the neighborhood impacts of having all the Olive business customers parking in front of single family homes?
Yeah, so I touched on that a little bit already. So generally speaking, within 300 feet of Olive, where the alternative supply is available, those potential 208 spaces, there's generally not land uses that to reflect single family. I mean, there's some in some parts, but generally it's commercial, it's other types of uses, institutional, and it's multifamily. So I don't think we anticipate a lot of people trying to park in front of single family neighborhoods. And also, as I mentioned, there are additional steps that we can work with the city to take to sort of discourage people from parking in front of people's homes. There's different regulations you could add related to the parking that exists on the curb outside of single family residences that can be implemented to mitigate that potential effect.
Thank you, Scott. We have just a little bit under 20 minutes left for this meeting. Again, we'll be here at 5 o'clock to run this presentation again for you. So if you would like to join us, please do so. Provide the same information. If you are still have questions, you can use the Q&A feature. If you're listening via phone, please text us at 818-650-0619. Going on to our next question. It's more about designing and city. They're asking, are you considering any installation of cul-de-sacs on side streets throughout the lanes? I would assume they mean throughout the project in areas where they were connected to Olive, but can you address that, Scott?
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. We're not proposing any kind of changes to street circulation off of Olive. I don't know, Brett, if you have anything you want to add, but
No.
Okay, let's go on to the next question. This is about the bus stop. Where is the bus stop located between Buena Vista and Victory? Is there a particular location that's been decided yet on the bus stop between Buena Vista and Victory?
the closest stop to that area would be at Verdugo. And that was a stop that we had as an optional stop in the draft EIR. And we received a number of comments from the public asking us to include that as a recommended stop. And in response to that, we did. So that is now one of the 22 stops along the project.
All right, thank you, Scott. And as we get more questions, I will reiterate again that you can provide your questions and comments via the Q&A feature. And also you can, if you are listening via phone, you can text us at 818-650-0619. This presentation, if you didn't catch all of it, will again be done at 5 o'clock live today via Zoom. And the recording of the meeting will be uploaded in the next couple of days on our project webpage and hosted via YouTube. And the project webpage is metro.net/NoHo Pass BRT. Once again, metro.net/NoHo Pass BRT. Let's see. Question, will the BRT lane impact the curb in front of the courthouse, the sheriff's, and other important vehicles parked there?
So with the curb running bus lanes, the answer is that yes, the curb would be used for the bus lanes. And kind of going back to the question about loading and people temporarily pulling over to park for loading, unloading. Those are issues that we would tackle on a case-by-case basis, whether they could be moved off of Olive directly, or if there's another solution that can be found, including potentially allowing some of the white curb to remain
Right.
in crucial situations, in which case the buses would simply route around a vehicle that was parked against the curb and briefly get into the mixed traffic lanes and then go back into the bus lane.
Right, thanks, Scott. Here's a question about the stations and moving them to Olive. Could you share the feedback and reasoning that prompted the station to move to Olive, Verdugo, and Sparks, and where was it previously?
So yeah, I think I touched on that a bit already. We've always had a potential station at Olive, Verdugo, Sparks. We did list that in the draft EIR, but it was listed as an optional station. So it was a station that we were considering, but we wanted to hear more feedback from the public and from key stakeholders to understand if that was a stop that people thought would be worthwhile to add. And based on comments we did get a number of comments from the public through the draft EIR comment period, through the public hearings that we did, in which and some of the subsequent public community outreach efforts, that was a desired stop. And so in response to that, we made that a permanent stop that we recommended to the board in May.
All right, thanks, Scott. Here's about the question about the Burbank. Again, the overview through Burbank indicates a large amount of mixed traffic and transition segments. Why is this being promoted as a BRT if it has mixed traffic and transition segments?
Well, the majority of the route will be in dedicated bus lanes. I mean, along the entire route, there are going to be some mixed traffic conditions which are necessary either because of right-of-way constraints in a particular stretch or for a transition zone. If you're going to a street, a new street, or to a street where the right-of-way changes or the configuration changes, that allows for the buses to maybe go into a different type of configuration that works better for that stretch, then it does require a transition, and the buses have to get from the curb over to, say, a center running bus lane. And so there's always going to be some pockets of mixed flow and mixed traffic. And so one of our big goals is to really maximize the amount of dedicated bus lanes that we can get. And in Burbank, we've done that to a pretty large extent here. Most of the route will be in dedicated bus lanes in Burbank.
And also, Scott, where the bus is going from the bus lane into mixed flow, at some of those locations, it may be possible to provide a special bus signal that would let the bus leave a few seconds early and get out there ahead of the regular traffic.
Thank you. And I think also the biggest segment where we have mixed flow is primarily on the freeways. So again, where people see the mixed flow is usually on the parts of the freeway when the bus gets on in North Hollywood and then approaching Pasadena.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you for pointing that out, Tito. And we're on the freeway at a couple of different stretches, but not for particularly long stretches. So by the time we get on the freeway, it's not long before we actually get off. So to try to, we had some right-of-way challenges with trying to get dedicated bus lanes on the freeway, and they're short enough stretches. We felt that mixed flow would work pretty well for those stretches of the freeway.
All right, thank you, Scott. Back again to the Olive, Verdugo, Sparks intersection. How would each option affect the Olive, Verdugo, Sparks intersection? And that is particularly dangerous and confusing intersection already. So can you go back and elaborate a little bit more about how the curb and the side running options would affect that intersection?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we can answer it to some degree now. I'll let Brent answer that. I do know that the city is planning to do an intersection improvements project for Olive, Verdugo, Sparks. There's a couple of different options that they've been considering for quite some time now, and ultimately we'll adjust to the design however we need to work well. Not only whether it stays with existing conditions for a while, or when one of those options is ultimately implemented by the city, we'll adjust the design accordingly. But Brent, do you want to kind of talk about what some of those differences might be for the buses?
it's either going to be, you know, if it's curb running, there's a lot of red curb already at that intersection because of its configuration. So with the curb running option, it'd be a minor widening, and using that red curb area, you know, that would sort of become actually the bus lane in there as curb running. If it's the side running option, it would be in the existing outside lane, so it wouldn't really change anything at all. Certainly, the reconfiguration of that entire intersection, which I think the option the city was looking at favoring was going to sort of jug handle out Verdugo. So Verdugo would no longer be a through street at that location. That would actually improve operations on Olive, and it would actually help us get the bus lane through there if that were to occur. But, you know, obviously that's a future improvement. So there might need to be some phased considerations for those stops at that location, taking into account of the future improvements.
All right, thanks, Brent and Scott. We're approaching our final questions here. We are within the last 10 minutes of the meeting. So let's talk about the trees. How would the placement of existing trees be affected by curb running lanes? Are there any impacts proposed to the existing trees that are along Olive?
Yeah, there could be, and that's one of the design challenges that we still have to work through in blocks where there are some of those existing trees. I think we're going to kind of take it one block at a time and sort of figure out, you know, what we can do to kind of move through there and minimize the impacts to the trees. Brad, do you want to kind of touch a little bit more on that?
Well, I think it's going to depend upon, you know, whether they're, you know, heritage or large, fully mature trees, or whether they're younger. If they're younger and they're within 2 feet of the curb, they would need to be replaced as part of the reconstruction of the curb line. Some of the ones that are big trees, heritage trees close to the curb, we would probably leave those in place and omit the bus lane at those locations. But there's only a few spots that there's very large trees at.
And Brent, and you were saying that depending on the proximity to the curb, it would be impacted. Is this relevant to both options, the side running and the curb running, or
only for curb running?
Okay,
so side running is not going to affect anything unless it's even at the station areas. I don't think we have any trees at the station areas, so yeah, primarily a side.
Okay, so just to reiterate, just to clarify then, so the curb running option, which is the one that would replace parking for a BRT lane, would have more impacts to the existing trees than the option that is the side running, which would replace the existing travel lane to a BRT lane, correct?
Right, and their mitigation cited in the EIR.
All right, thank you for clarifying. Next question is, will we be able to temporarily park on the curb on Olive westbound between First and San Fernando to drop off mail at the post office boxes on the street in front of the post office?
Yeah, so that's a pretty specific question. I think that's something we would want to speak with the city about to understand sort of what the best way is to access mailboxes for private vehicles, and whether maybe we could move those to an adjacent side street. But yeah, I don't know if I can answer that question fully, but we'll kind of approach that the same way we would with the curb running option for the whole route, where we'll look at sort of what drop-offs are needed where, and which ones can maybe be potentially moved. So that'll be part of that conversation. And again, it only applies to the curb running option, although in that area it's curb running anyway. So yeah, that will apply, and we'll have those conversations with the city.
All right, thanks, Scott. And again, this is in the downtown area that they're referring to.
Yeah.
All right. How will the design of the bus stops be developed? Pretty simple question about the bus stop and design.
Yeah, so we've got a design team internally that's going to work on that. We've got sort of a basic kit of parts vision for the stops, in which we have sort of a basic design. In some degree, we've already kind of identified on a high level what that would be. We've got images and some Metro documents with BRT vision and principle study highlight some of that. But as we get kind of more into the specifics for this project and at specific stations, we'll design it both from an architectural standpoint, and then kind of looking at each stop, it'll be a little bit different depending on the available space and the configuration. So there'll be some differences depending on which part of the route we're on and how much space we have to work with. But yeah, that'll be a process that will unfold as we advance design of the project.
All right, thanks, Scott. We're coming down to our last couple questions. Here's one about the types of buses that we're going to be getting, the electric buses. What are the bus dimensions and max passenger capacity on the proposed electric buses that we would be getting?
So the basic dimension, the 40-foot buses are what we're planning for, which is the typical size that you see out there now. There'll be zero emissions. So we have, as Tito, you already mentioned, we're transitioning to a zero emission bus fleet. We've already begun procuring a lot of buses for the Orange Line, and then the BRTs will be prioritized for some of the later shipments of the electric buses. As to the exact passenger capacity, I can't speak to that, but I would imagine it'll be similar to what they are now. Brent, do you want to kind of speak on what the typical passenger capacities are for 40-foot buses?
Well, it's about 40 plus sitting, and then another 10 or so standing. I mean, it depends upon the particular configuration of the seating and everything.
All right, thank you for sharing. Again, so let's go on to the next question. Where exactly will the stations at Olive, Verdugo, Sparks be located for both directions?
Brent, do you want to kind of speak as to sort of what the latest thinking is in terms of station placement, to the degree to which we've been able to determine that?
Well, I mean, I think those drawings are in Appendix Z to the EIR document. My recollection is we had double near side stops there. So those specific stop placements are going to need to be looked at again in terms of the future plans for that intersection, because if we can identify a location where we don't have to move it, if the intersection gets rebuilt, then we would probably adjust it somewhat. So that's more of a detailed design question when we get further on.
Okay, thank you both for answering these questions.
One more thing I
Yes.
should probably mention is that the stops are coordinated with the existing signalized protected crosswalk. So that's another important consideration. We want to have the stations adjacent to a crosswalk where people can safely access the stop from either side of the street.
Thank you, Brent. Again, Scott and Brent, thank you for your time this afternoon, morning and afternoon, for answering these questions. I'll take the last question, and it'll actually be a part of our closing. But the question is, can you provide the web address for this presentation and where it's going to be uploaded to again? And I think additionally, I can share that the draft environmental impact report, or draft EIR, that Brent was referring to as well, is available at the project webpage at metro.net/NoHo Pass BRT, and this will be available under the documents section. We are in the process of upgrading our web pages for all of Metro, and we are in a temporary housing right now online. So the documents page is where we are holding these documents, including the draft environmental impact report. This presentation will be uploaded again. I would expect the PowerPoint to be uploaded probably by tomorrow. The video presentation will be uploaded, I would say, by Friday. We have to process it and then have it uploaded to YouTube and go through the channels to provide that information as well. That will be available as well, again, after the meetings have been concluded. So our next meeting is this afternoon at 5 p.m. where we will present this information all over again. And if there's anything that you missed and you would like to see, please make sure to be a part of the presentation again. Metro.net/NoHo Pass BRT is the project webpage. You can also email us at nohopassbrt@metro.net. If you are not already on the project database, please email us to request to be added to the project database at our project email, nohopassbrt@metro.net. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us. It is now 1:01 in the afternoon, and we are going to conclude this meeting. I want to thank you all for participating again, and appreciate everybody's input and questions that were provided today. Everybody have a good day. Thank you.